Hi friends, welcome to Growing as Grown-Ups, where we believe each of us has the opportunity to keep growing in ways that can fundamentally improve our life effectiveness, our leadership influence, and our well-being. Through interviews, stories, and practical principles, we explore how you can accelerate your growth and unlock your potential to make the difference you want to make. And now, your hosts from the Leaders Lyceum, Dr. Sara Musgrove and Dr. Keith Eigel.
You guys resonated in terms of like your just passion for growing people. One of the early comments was kind of just the joy that comes from being helpful to people. And I think our listeners will really get to experience that joy today in your conversation with her.
Oh, I hope so. I just have to say, one of the things I love about doing this podcast is that I get to meet new people. And Kedren is one of those people I have never met before. I heard her on her podcast, The Behaviorist, and knew that she was an expert in emotional intelligence. And that was a topic I have people ask me about a lot, clients asking me to help them with it. People who just want to understand it more. And so I thought, well, let me just reach out to Kedren and see if she would be willing to come on our podcast. And she so graciously agreed. So Kedren Crosby is the president of a company called Work Wisdom that does a lot of cool work, kind of in the space that we do, of really helping organizations kind of work on thriving and optimal workplace performance, and really kind of in some of the softer skills per se of mindsets and behaviors. She has a master's degree in policy science that she talks about a bit in the interview. And she has certifications in nonprofit studies, conflict resolution, emotional intelligence, has studied organizational behavior. She is like me in that she is a lifelong learner, it seems. And she really focuses on burnout, work-life integration, authentic leadership, organizational culture, conflict management, really with a bent toward positive psychology and positive emotional behavior. So all stuff that I find exciting and fascinating and interesting. Yeah. And if I could go back to school and study it all, I would.
That's what we need. I just brought her on. We need you in school a little bit more.
I need a few more degrees, right? But I just wanted to pull on her wisdom on emotional intelligence and why that is something that matters at work, why it is something for people to be thinking about and understanding. And so I think with that, let's just jump into the interview, and then we'll come back on the back end as we usually do and share some of the things that stood out to us. Does that sound good?
Sounds perfect. We'll see you on the back side of this.
Kedren, welcome to the Growing as Grown-Ups podcast. I'm so glad it has worked out for us to finally get you on the show. I'm excited to get to know you, get to hear more about the work that you do and the expertise you bring. So thank you so much for giving your time to a random stranger who reached out to you and said, come be on my podcast.
I can tell it's already future friend. So yeah, thank you for inviting me.
Well, I'd love for you to tell us just a little bit about yourself and your work, the stuff that's interesting beyond the credentials that you have, just how you ended up where you are, the passions that you have. What would help our audience get to know you a little bit?
Well, so I've been doing this sort of work, focusing on coaching, long before we called it coaching, since about 1996. And so I ended up in this work. Originally, I was studying policy science, which is how do we use economics, sociology, statistics to make the world a better place. And I ended up leading several organizations and realized that wasn't actually what made teams high performing. What made teams really high performing was culture, was emotional intelligence, connection, meaning, inspiration. And so continued to go back to school several times in order to grow my tools so that I could help my clients become the best version of themselves. So I've always really focused on what we consider world changers. So people who are doing important work, going upstream to make the world a better place, and trying to give them evidence-based tools and skills so they can have even greater performance. So that's a little bit about me. I think you've probably already shared my bio, so they don't need to know those details. But I just find a lot of joy in being helpful to people and then seeing their fruit multiply as a result of our work together.
I love that. I was telling you before we hit record, like how fun it is to find other people with the same passion of like, work is not just work. Work is an opportunity for us to improve ourselves, improve the world beyond just kind of the checklist of I'm showing up, I'm getting a paycheck, I'm producing widgets, I'm selling things. Right. And so I just love that you're in that space. I found you through your podcast, The Behaviorist, which is really fun. So another thing I'd recommend our people listen to learn more about the work that you're doing. But the reason I wanted to have you on is that one of the things that you mentioned a second ago, and that you really have devoted a lot of your time and professional effort to, is this idea of emotional intelligence. And it's a phrase that I hear a lot. I hear it a lot when people are labeled as not emotionally intelligent. I get a lot of coaching clients sent to me with just the description of they need to be better with their emotional intelligence, which can mean a lot of things. And so let me just throw that question to you. What is emotional intelligence? How do you explain it to people of what it is and maybe what it's not? What role it plays?
Well, it's probably best to start with a tiny bit of history. So Dr. Wechsler was the man who invented the IQ. And so this was the measurement of cognitive intelligence. What can we remember? What can we regurgitate? How much information can we hold up there? He always knew that there was a type of intelligence that he was not able to measure. And that is he called it affective intelligence, affective emotions. So it was many, many years after he was stumped by that quandary of not being able to measure it, until the EQ was created. So emotional intelligence is really measuring things that are different than cognitive intelligence. And in short, emotional intelligence is really 4 things. So the first part of emotional intelligence is how we perceive and express ourselves. Obviously, very important in the workplace. Probably some of those people who are being sent to you, it's because they don't know how to perceive or express themselves. The second part has to do with how we build and maintain interpersonal relationships. Also very important in the workplace. The third part really has to do with how we cope with stress, which is why we're very much focused on burnout. And the fourth part of the definition of emotional intelligence is really how we read emotional data, how we see emotional content in any problem that we're trying to solve or decision that we're trying to make. And then we weave that in a constructive way into our decision making or our problem solving. And we don't allow the emotional content to hijack the decision making, but we allow it to improve our results. So those are the 4 things that really, when we're talking about emotional intelligence: perceive and express ourselves, build and maintain interpersonal relationships, cope with stress, and then weave emotional data into how we solve problems or make decisions.
So what does it look like when someone has a high EQ, somebody who's really emotionally healthy? What does that look like? Is that a question that has an answer to it?
Yeah, that is an excellent question. I'm not sure I've been asked it just like that. So I really love the way you're framing that in such an appreciative way. What it looks like is that person has awareness of what they're feeling in that moment. They might even have the language to name what that feeling is that they're feeling. They hopefully also have the impulse control, the self-regulation to tap the brakes and not act on that feeling. They recognize that they are not their feelings, and that, the horse and the rider, as Freud would talk about, they can control how they're going to behave, but they use that information to guide better outcomes. So an emotionally intelligent person shows up very differently in every situation.
Sure.
But I think those are the elements. They're aware, they have the knowledge, they have the awareness of themselves, they understand how they are emotionally contagious, they're managing themselves to resonate on their teams and make better decisions and have better outcomes.
So I love the phrase that you use, that people are not their emotions. And I think, that's something that I talk with people about, is like, emotions are real. You have them. They can be really strong in either direction. And there's no good or bad associated with the emotion. It's whether or not you take ownership of that emotion. If you have emotions, or if your emotions have you. So I think that's that phrase is a good one to hang on to, I think, when people are trying to wrestle through this.
Yeah, I think I love that you do that with your clients. We're always thinking about, I am not my feeling, it's information. So I like the idea of like seeing that as a gold mine and digging down in there and saying, I'm curious, what are you bringing me? And how can I use you? But recognizing that feelings or emotions are like the weather, and they come and they go and they pass. And we can invite them in and, get curious about them, but they don't have to control us.
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. I love it. So have you found that there's any relationship between age, gender, personality type? Like, what are the factors that lead into somebody's level of emotional intelligence?
Well, it's not really related to personality. It can be related to socialization. So somewhat how you've been nurtured. You might have been raised to have breadth of emotional vocabulary, or to be reflective in a way, to be emotionally aware. But if you control for lots of circumstances like that, we can't say, oh, women are more emotionally intelligent. They maybe have been sometimes socialized to pay more attention to emotions and how they impact outcome. We do tend to work quite a bit with men of a certain age who were not socialized to give much attention to emotions. And so we spend quite a bit of our work with engineers or physicians. We have feelings wheels, pillows in every coaching room in our office, to help them learn to identify feelings, to grow their vocabulary around feelings, to learn how to name it, analyze it for usefulness and applicability. So, but no, I would say it's not, we can't really attribute it to personality. And it's all developable. So IQ is fixed. Personality is fairly fixed from about 5 years old. But emotional intelligence is never fixed. So we grow in knowledge, then we grow in awareness, and let that sort of seep into our being. And then we let it guide our behavior. Now that it's conscious, we can say, oh, I always went left here, but now that I know the thing, I'm going to go right and see if I get a different result. So it's very optimistic. It's hopeful because it's not fixed. And that's one of the reasons why we think it's such a useful tool for people.
That's great. So let's just go down that path for a second then.
Okay.
If somebody hearing your description of what emotional intelligence is recognizes in themselves, or maybe they've gotten some feedback from a boss or a friend that says, you're not so great at this, what kinds of things can people do to develop their emotional intelligence?
Mm-hmm. Many things, beginning with knowledge. So learning what emotional intelligence is, I think it's very helpful to go beyond that definition into there are 15 concrete measurable skills. So learning what those 15 skills are: assertiveness, emotional expression, interpersonal relationships, self-regulation, impulse control, things like that. So learning what emotional intelligence is, and then starting to get curious about their own baseline. So where am I at on these 15 skills? Ideally, you would have use the psychometric measurement, the EQ, and have a valid, reliable measurement, but you might have a wife or a boss or a coworker who can give you a lot of insight too. So, using them is important, and doing a bit of a 360 on yourself, if you can, to start gathering up, okay, where do I have superpowers? Where am I kind of amazing? And where do I have some growing edges? That also can be really helpful. So then once you've understood your status quo, where am I at, my baseline, then starting to create a learning curriculum for yourself. So thinking about, if I in fact want to become more assertive, or I want to grow in my my interpersonal relationships, what new mindsets or behaviors or habits or skills do I need to drop into my toolbox so I become this envisioned, more emotionally intelligent version of myself? So, I think starting with knowledge, what is emotional intelligence? Moving to a status quo, sort of where am I at now? Envisioning this future version of yourself, and then backcasting into what's my learning curriculum here. At Work Wisdom, we use a lot of work by Richard Boyatzis, helping people change, intentional change theory. And so essentially, we believe that someone needs to vision a future, better version of themselves, come back to the present, take a realistic inventory of who I am now, then start creating this learning agenda, learning curriculum, then experiment with all of those new ways of being and build relationships around them so they have a support system to experiment with those new ways of being. That's essentially intentional change theory. So that's the method that we believe in.
So good.
I know. He's fantastic.
There's so many other things running through my head, but I'm going to stay on track. So, is there a resource that you would recommend? And I did not tell you this in advance to come prepared, but if someone wants to learn the 15 skills of emotional intelligence, like where do they even start?
Mm-hmm. Well, I began by reading Daniel Goleman's book, Emotional Intelligence. I think that was 1985. I can't remember what year that book came out.
We can link to all this stuff. So
yeah. I think that is a fantastic resource. Then I think the second most practical thing they can do is pick up the HBR compendium of the best articles that they've published around emotional intelligence. So yes, there are some articles in there by Daniel Goleman, but really great ones by Annie McKee and lots of other people. I think that's probably the best start. If they want to learn about the 15 concrete measurable skills, there's a book called The EQ Edge that really takes you through each of the 15 skills. It's really a textbook that goes along with the, I have a certification in emotional intelligence, the psychometric tool. So it's a little dry, but it's really, maybe I shouldn't have said that on the air, but you can edit that if you want to. But it really does go deep into what does it look like when it's practiced well. These are some of the tools to go deeper into each of the 15 skills.
Yeah, that's great, because for our listeners, what the feedback I get from people is we have some people that want the highlight version, and some people love the going deep, reading the textbooks, studying it. And so to have a range of that, I think is great.
One more thing, Sarah, I want to add to that, since you're really focused on leadership, there are some books about emotionally intelligent leadership that are fantastic resources. So Primal Leadership by Daniel Goleman and Richard Boyatzis, and also Resonant Leadership is about emotionally intelligent leadership, how to learn how to resonate. So how to use your emotions to build positive contagion so that the culture really improves. Those are 2 more books I would say put on your list.
Love it. Oh my gosh, my reading list is just growing. So this is great. So let's go down this path a little more about emotional intelligence in the workplace and leadership. And why is that something that even matters at work? It feels like it's more of a personal thing. It's more of a soft skills. Why is that something that's important talking about in the context of work?
So many reasons. One is just empirically, emotional intelligence is attributable to between 60 and 85% of your success in the workplace, depending on what research you read. So that's one reason. It's wildly correlated with success in the workplace. Secondly, the more power an individual has in the workplace, the more contagious they are. And I'm sure that you have seen this in your work, and I'm sure all of your listeners have heard it too, but someone with high power in the workplace, if they walk down the hallway and they're in a terrible mood and they're very grumpy, all of a sudden everyone's infected, right?
Right.
Conversely, if someone knows how to manage those emotions and they walk down the hallway and they're bringing this positive, best version of themselves, there's resonance, and there's joy, and there's more meaning, and there's more awareness. And so that impacts the whole system. So I think that's one reason why leaders really need to be more aware, maybe than even non-leaders, about emotional intelligence. The third factor has really been exacerbated by the Great Resignation. So, as we've been seeing, the reason why people are leaving the workplace has to do with 2 primary factors. There was a McKinsey report that came out in September that was pretty mind-blowing. The first reason why people are saying that they are leaving their jobs is because they don't feel valued by the organization. The second is they don't feel valued by their manager. And the third reason they're leaving their jobs is because they don't have a sense of belonging in the workplace. And so all of that has everything to do with emotional intelligence.
So which is so contrary to what people tend to think of. They're not getting paid enough. They don't have the right benefits. It really is.
Yeah, not anymore.
Less tangible things.
Yeah.
So I feel like there's this interesting paradox, and maybe that's not the right word, of being aware of this emotional contagion and the impact that I can have on the culture and the environment in which I am showing up in. And also being authentic, right? Because I've worked with several companies that have what I call like the Disney World culture, where you have to come in and you have to put the smile on your face and you have to be okay. And it's not okay to not be okay.
Toxic
Because
positive.
we have to be happy and we have to bring happiness to the workplace. But especially with everything going on in the world right now, a lot of people are not okay.
Yeah.
And so how does that work?
I love that you're asking that. So Work Wisdom, we're positive organizational behaviorists. So we're interested in positivity. We're also interested in toxic positivity. When is it really damaging that you're shining it on and you're inauthentic? So what we practice is authentic positivity. So if in fact you're experiencing grief or burnout, anxiety, depression, any of those things, we want you to take care of yourself, and we want you to own what you're experiencing, but as much as possible, be bringing that best version of yourself to the workplace. So just as if there was some physical ailment, you would take care of that. You would see a doctor. You would heal. We believe in doing that with your emotional health as well. So seeing a therapist, seeing a grief counselor, making time even in the culture of the organization to honor mental health, so that people are in fact authentically flourishing, not shining it on, not toxic positivity at all. And that means that there are times where people need to take some breaks, and there may be some sabbaticals and there may be some time off, but honoring that. One thing I've been really fascinated and doing a lot of work on right now is burnout is so often seen as a deficiency of self-care. Like you're not getting enough massages, or you're not getting enough, something like that. But I really think as leaders, we need to start reframing it as an organizational issue. So burnout, clinical burnout, when we're thinking about clinical burnout, what does it mean for us as leaders to start caring for the whole person? Caring for the whole person. So the three elements of burnout, of course, are the emotional exhaustion, cynicism, and the lack of professional efficacy. So as leaders, as the caretakers of our culture, can we think about what we would need to bake in to our mindsets and our behaviors so that we were caring for the emotional well-being, that we were caring about enthusiasm and mitigating the cynicism, and we were building that professional efficacy so that when someone put effort in, they could see the results that were commensurate, and they would feel that kind of joy that goes along with that agency. That was a rambling answer.
No, but it paints a picture of what I would love the workplace to be, right? This envisioning the future kind of thing. But I have worked in organizations where I was working under leaders that did not have that mentality. It was you're here to show up and do your job. I don't really care if you're happy. Get it done. And so if somebody, obviously for the people that are listening to this who have the influence to shape the culture, do that, right? Care for your people and their mental health. What about the people who don't have that scope of influence, who are working in an environment that doesn't take care of their mental health? Are there things they can do, or is there a point where you say this environment is not healthy for me? and I need to remove myself.
Yeah. I think the answer is yes. And, that if we think about where you are today, you voted with your feet and you decided to move away from that environment that didn't value you, where you didn't feel like you could be a whole person. And I think more and more we're seeing that. So I think it is wise for leaders to take the long view and take care of their people. If you are an individual who is in a situation where you have a leader who isn't taking care of you, I think then it's very much about boundaries, and understanding how to behave if you really value yourself. Always thinking about, in burnout, very often we talk about self-compassion. I think it's more than self-compassion. It's what would I do if I really valued myself? What would I do if I absolutely loved myself? And then doing that. And it may be staying in that job for a while and making a plan. It may be staying in that job for a very long time, but having incredibly healthy boundaries. So you're taking care of yourself.
Yeah, I think that's really good. And I think, some people that I work with say, not only am I going to do that for my own good, I want to also try to help shape the culture. I want to be there for other people.
Yeah.
And I think some people, they don't have the strength to do that in a good way. And it can lead to some really detrimental outcomes. So I've worked with somebody once who was not emotionally intelligent, who was kind of he kept referencing celebrity CEOs and people, well, I won't say names, I guess, but the celebrity CEOs who are kind of known for being jerks, who are known for being hard to be around, but who are super successful. And his argument was, they don't sit around talking about touchy-feely things, and they're super successful and rich and famous. I want to be like them. And so in those extreme cases, is there a way to sell somebody on why it matters to think about a person's emotions, their mental health, creating positive work cultures instead of just focusing on the bottom line?
Well, I think, sometimes when we look at those seemingly eccentric, celebrity CEOs that don't seem emotionally intelligent, they might be. We don't really know what's going on there. So they might just have incredible hubris, which makes them annoying, but they might be emotionally intelligent. It's hard to say, but it's really so much of it comes down to, are you taking the short view or the long view for your company? And this is true with culture shaping. This is true with socially responsible business practices. Are we short viewing? Are we thinking about this quarter? Are we thinking about next quarter? Or are we thinking about next year? Are we like Patagonia, thinking 100 years from now? And are we thinking about not just, who is going to be on our team in 8 months, but who's going to be shepherding this company in 20 years? So I think that as much as we can take the long view for our companies, our communities, our planet, we're wise to do that. And I think that not only does that ultimately give us better results, bottom line, but triple bottom line, people, planet, and profit, but it also probably gives us more joy as an individual. So when people ask you that, or people ask me that, I always ask, well, what's the goal? What's the goal? Is the goal about Q4 and the financial bottom line, or is the goal about 2030? And so I think that changes our perspective about what is important.
That is great advice. And it's hard to imagine how you can think about the long view without thinking about the people in the ripple effect that your behavior has today. So I hope people take that advice to heart and think about that. And you know, I just love what you said a while back about this idea of kind of understanding your baseline, getting the feedback, start watching yourself to see, how am I showing up in this way? What impact? One thing I ask people who are struggling with this idea is to go ask other people, what impact does this behavior have on you, right? If I am always interrupting you in a meeting because I'm impatient, what impact does that have on you? What impact do you see that has on other people? And start thinking about that ripple effect of impact. So
Sara, that is a great question. I hope you don't mind that I'm going to borrow that.
I'll let you use it.
But it comes down to this sort of the space between two people. I know the Japanese have a word for it. We don't yet, right? But that really so much of our relationships is this invisible space between us. So your question of how does this impact you when I'm constantly interrupting you? Is it diminishing the quality of the space between you and me, that interpersonal relationship? Yeah, I love your question, and I'll be borrowing it.
You're welcome. Kedren, as we wrap up, what's going on in your world, in the work wisdom world, that you are excited about, that you would love to tell our listeners?
Well, probably there are a couple things. We just hired someone on our team whose background is sports psychology. So that's new for us. And that's interesting. We're focusing quite a bit on burnout. And just as I was saying, not burnout as a deficiency of self-care, but as a culture issue. How do we create flourishing cultures where we're mitigating burnout? Probably the most exciting thing is our new book that we're working on right now called Relate. So this will be the third book on Work Wisdom Press, which is all about how do we create healthy relationships in the workplace? How's that different than personal relationships? So that's really exciting. That's what we're probably most excited about right now.
That's awesome. When's your book come out?
We have no idea.
Okay. Work in progress.
Yeah, work in progress. Yeah. I think about a year ago, we thought we were close to being finished, and then we were not. So, these things, they're born when they're ready to be born.
Yeah. Well, keep us posted. We'll definitely share it with our listeners when it comes out and send people your way. So where do people find you? Where do they learn more about the work that you have going on?
Probably our website is the best place. That's workwisdomllc.com. But we have quite a following on Instagram and our YouTube channel. We have a lot of animated shorts that we do about positive organizational behavior. So yeah, probably the Instagram or YouTube or the website.
And are you at Work Wisdom on Instagram?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
on YouTube. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. We'll send everybody those links, and we love to help connect you with our listeners and our listeners with the resources that they are interested in. So that'll be great. I'm going to go check out a bunch of that. And my reading list has just gotten a lot longer. So
a lot under your stuff here. Yeah.
I know. Well, thank you so much for being generous with your time. I know you're a very busy woman and you're doing really great work. So thank you for coming to the Growing as Grownups world and sharing this. And we will definitely stay in touch. So let us know about your book and other things you have going on.
Thank you so much, Sara. It was really a joy to be with you and learn about what you're doing too. So good luck to you.
Thank you so much.
Talk to you soon.
Sara, way to go. What a fun conversation. And again, y'all's resonance with each other was apparent throughout the interview. I love that. The I tell you, I think one of the things that really struck me was just Kedren's sort of orientation to make a difference for people, to help use this tool of emotional intelligence to give them a different kind of self-awareness, to give them sort of steps to take to address all of that, right? I mean, it so fits with the growing as grown-ups theme, right? I mean, and what a great guest for this. What was the biggest thing in real time that jumped out to you about your conversation with her?
Yeah, I mean, I think the phrase that stuck out to me, and it's because, again, it resonated so much with the way that we talk about things, is she even used the phrase, like, emotions are just the weather, right? And I didn't interrupt her to talk about how we use this idea
I know,
of all
but I
these
saw
things
the
that are
smile on
happening
your
around
face.
us. Right. Emotions are, the way she talked about it, emotions are information. They are things that we can identify when we have this level of kind of healthy emotional intelligence. We can look at them and say, what does this tell me about what's going on inside of me? And we even use it sometimes in terms of our growth gap tool, or identifying frustrations, as these kind of emotions tell us about something that matters to us. And then the separation of, we are not our feelings, right? And I just, putting emotions in a healthy, proper place, I feel like is something that is not talked about a lot in the workplace. A lot of times we want to kind of separate emotions from, we gotta be productive. But this idea that she said, that emotional intelligence really is related to our success at work, I thought was really interesting. So that was kind of the first thing that stood out to me, is this idea of emotions or information. They're just the weather. They help us learn something new about what else is going on. So
Yeah.
what about you? You just listened to it for the first time. What did you think?
Well, I mean, a lot of good stuff. I mean, to kind of build on the point that you did, I'm trying to find it in my notes, and I don't know whether I can do that quickly enough, but that people are not their emotions. Right. And I thought that was a really challenging thought to sort of wrap your head around for a minute, that that I am Keith, I'm not angry, even when I'm angry.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I mean, there's a little bit of a kind of funny way to begin thinking about, well, what does that mean for me not to be my emotions? And I think there's a lot of that can sort of challenge people from more of a outside in to inside out, as we've talked about so much, sort of understanding of themselves, to create that separation. And I think that's why it so resonated with the weather. And by the way, Sarah, I was so ready for you to go off on the weather when she introduced the weather, but you didn't. Way to go. Way to be restrained.
Thank you.
I think for me, the biggest thing was actually not on topic to emotional intelligence. I mean, it was all tied into it. But it was later in the interview when she started talking about the Great Resignation, and that why people are disconnecting from organizations. And obviously there's an emotional component to that, right? But this idea of leaving because they don't feel valued by their organization, by their leader, by a sense of belonging, and then tying this sense of belonging into the clinical burnout. This caring for the whole person, this idea that there is emotional exhaustion, cynicism, and a lack of professional efficacy, feeling like you make a difference, which is tied into the belonging piece, which made me think of a book I just am in the middle of, about to finish, by a guy named John Wergen, called Deep Learning, and so resonates with everything that, he's a big Keegan fan, but he pushes it out to, I don't know, Heifetz and Torbert and all of these other, Peter Senge, and all of these different people who've talked about learning and how we grow ourselves, and that this idea that we have to have motivation, which is driven by these things that she's talking about. We need to be motivated to grow ourselves. And in order for us to do that, we need to feel a personal connection, a sense of belonging, a sense of efficacy in what we're doing. And for me, the conversation that you guys had, this is not on topic, I'm sorry, but it just knitted together a bunch of things that have been floating around my sphere for a little while. You know, and talking about how we've got to, you know, emotions are a great connection to our disruption. I don't know if does that make sense? I'm looking at your
Tell
face.
me, yeah, go deeper on that.
So when we are having an emotional reaction to something, even if we're less sophisticated at naming what that thing is, we're feeling something inside of us. And obviously kind of the surface emotions of kind of anger or frustration or things like that. When it's really something different, like being not valued, or you know, that when we're really feeling not valued, but we put it into the category of anger, it's like too simple, right?
Sure.
But when we're feeling this thing that we name as an emotional reaction, I think it's a lot of times pointing to something. It's pointing to an opportunity for growth. It's pointing to a developmental disruption. It's pointing to a way that it's pointing to a place that we maybe need to put a spotlight on in our lives and do some thinking about. And then obviously with people like Kedren, with a lot of the work that we do, it's then there are better and worse ways to walk through that journey. But that's where, you know, again, I feel like I'm rambling way too much on this, and I apologize for that. But as the Growing as Grownups podcast, it's like paying attention to this piece that we don't focus on a lot. We talk a lot about frustrations or complaints when we get people into the Growth Gap tool, but this kind of emotional space is all wrapped into this. And I love the way Kedren sort of knitted it together with the Great Resignation and kind of what we're going through on a way bigger spectrum. That's what just happening in any organization. It seems to be almost pandemic in its own way. Across.
I mean, it also reminded me of our last podcast with Dwayne Reynolds, talking about how the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion is really giving people a place where they feel valued and like they belong, right? So there's an emotional element to that, in that whole movement that needs to happen, where we learn to create places. And that's where she was saying this is not an individual self-care regulation kind of thing, that there's organizational strategies that need to be in place that help people show up as a whole person, that honor the whole person, that value the whole person, and help the whole person grow. So it does, it all connects in.
Really good. Anything else you want to squeeze in here before we let our audience go for this week?
I mean, the other thing I've been thinking about is just kind of this idea of emotional contagion. And that, you know, it's such a fancy sounding word, and it just makes me I feel like there was some movie Contagion about, I don't mean with COVID, it's a little too close to home, but just this idea that
movie freaked a lot of people out, by the way.
The more influence or power somebody has in an organization, the more their emotional state is contagious. And so for people who are trying to have influence, what kind of emotions are they bringing to the table? Are they bringing joy and optimism and hope, or are they bringing stress and annoyance and frustration? And how do we learn to be responsible for what we were putting out into kind of the emotional atmosphere around us? So that's something I've been thinking about is how do I show up even with my family? How do I show up at dinner, and what emotions am I bringing that will spread to the family? So
and recognizing the influence that you have in those different roles is big. That's actually the part of the conversation that led into her talking about the Great Resignation, which got me on this role. So I love that. Really cool. That caught my attention as well.
Well, Kedren and her team are doing some really interesting work in this space. As she talked about, they've got a book coming out. They've got a lot of cool resources on their website. Their podcast, The Behaviorist, is fun to listen to. So for people that want to keep learning more about this work and what Kedren is doing, go check her out.
Yeah, go check her out. You promised to put a lot of links in the show notes, so we've got some work to do to get ready for this one. Yeah,
we do. A lot of books, a lot of stuff. So, all right, everyone, thanks for joining us for another episode of Growing as Grownups, and we will see you again in a couple weeks.
Be well.
Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Growing as Grownups. Take a second and subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss any future episodes, and tell your friends. You'll find all of the goods related to this episode, including the transcript, videos, links, and other ways we can help you keep growing as a grownup on our website, growinggrownups.com. Growth isn't easy, but it's completely within your reach. Until next time, journey well, friends.